Welcome to the Parkinson's podcast Unfiltered with hosts Heather Kennedy and Kat Hill, brought to you by the Davis-Phinney Foundation. In each episode, Heather and Kat dive deep into the raw emotions and realities of life with Parkinson's.
Is this thing on?
Hello. Is anybody there?
You know, I am here. I'm here all the way. I'm fully present. We'll need to be fully present for what we have to deal with, don't you think?
I think it's a lesson in how to be fully present, Heather. I do. I think if you're not, your body reminds you that you aren't fully present if you're going off on a tangent.
It sure does.
The body remembers.
What happens when we leave our bodies or leave the present moment and trip out on something that's not really happening in real time? What happens to our bodies?
You know, I think it's interesting. I think for a very, very, very long time, I lived planning the future because I wanted to stay ahead of it. I wanted to be on top of things. I wanted, or I perceived this level of control. And boy, I'll tell you what, Parkinson's has taught me a lesson or two about not getting ahead of oneself, right?
Talk about being humbled. It's even more humbling than having children.
Depends on the day, Heather.
But let's talk about this. Let's talk about flipping the script.
Changing our narrative.
Yes, that.
Mm-hmm.
I love these idioms because they fit perfectly for Parkinson's.
They do.
We've taken issue with people calling it a fight or using warring language, you know, saying that you're going to beat it or fight it. We like to say, what if we just shifted a few things, move some things around?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've never loved the term losing the battle, right? Somebody lost their battle with Parkinson's because it makes it sound like somehow they did something wrong or had a strategy that didn't work. But how do we flip that around? How do you do it? How do we, because words matter, Heather. Words matter. What we tell ourselves is probably the most important story. And we've touched on that before in our discussions. But let's really dive into it.
I have a good friend.
Yeah.
Might be you, I'm not sure. Who always says, well, what if you reframed that? Instead of I have Parkinson's, how about I live with Parkinson's or I live with some challenges? Well, how does that feel like just to say it out loud? I have Parkinson's feels very much like this is out of my control. It's part of me. It comes to me everywhere, which is true in its essence. However, to say I live with it allows me to have a little distance from
it. It also sends the message, Heather, that you live with many things, right? I live with a dog. I live with my husband. I live with brown eyes.
Regret.
And I live
Hopefully
with
not.
hope and I live with Parkinson's. It's like it doesn't define me. And I think people have often asked, about positive attitudes and those kinds of things. And I think some of that comes in the words just that I choose to use, especially on the hard days, especially on the hard days. And it's not that I don't use words that can be hard. I've struggled with apathy, depression, anxiety, but I try to remember that I live with Parkinson's. I live with some of these side effects from Parkinson's, but they will evolve. It's sort of like this too shall pass a bit. But how do we get there, Heather? How do you get there in your language? How do you flip your script? What was your script like before you were diagnosed? And what is it like now?
I don't even know where to begin with that one. I can tell you that I'm a slow learner because I'm incredibly stubborn. I know it's hard to believe, but I had very strong beliefs about who I was and how I was appearing in the world. And those got destroyed, just demolished. I no longer have the decorum that I thought that I had. I'm at this point just trying to survive this quicksand, well, let's see. I wrote down a few things that I would use to describe Parkinson's. Here they are. It's like, you have a gravity blanket on and you're being submerged under the ice in the coldest waters. It's quicksand. It's drying concrete or cement. It's somebody shaking you from within, at the same time submerging you, holding you down. It's like you're being held down, so you're claustrophobic, but you're also being shaken. Really horrible feeling. However, if I flip that, I think, what does work? What can I feel? Where are my feet right now? So what I do is I ground. I notice. Just the act of noticing. It's not being present or being aware or being woke. It's just noticing, which requires sitting still, which might be a challenge. It requires
or
us
at
to
least
sort of like,
sitting, perhaps.
yeah. And just noticing, like, how does this chair feel? What is the quality of the air? Then I go to breath. Box breathing, or the breathing where you breathe in a little more, hold it, and then let it out through your mouth. Sort of re-establishing that center. And that's
So
usually after
bringing
prayer or meditation.
What I'm hearing is that in that shift, what is significant is what you're taking your brain, instead of thinking about the quicksand and the being underwater, you're moving your thoughts to, I'm breathing.
Right. I'm naming my thoughts.
You're naming the thoughts
as they come up. Oh, hello, future tripping. Hello, anxiety. There you are again. Don't stay too long.
Do you find when you name it or say it out loud or use the word, it deflates its power in your mind?
Absolutely, Kat. This is where dragging things into the light matters. You drag it into the light and you stab it with their stealing knives, but you just can't kill the beast.
The beast.
It's kind of like that. You drag your shadows. You admit them. You say, come on out, monsters, and all these thoughts and these negative patternings we get into. And ask, is this true?
Is this true? And Heather, I think we can get lost in that, right? We can, all of us, this is not about Parkinson's. This is about living in life and being human. We can all get lost in our darkest thoughts. And I think that's where we have to, should we make the choice to want to change our narrative, change how we feel about our experience, we can start changing our words and our pattern to reacting to what's happening with our bodies.
Brilliant.
And it's subtle, but I think it's really important to think about. I think some people journal about it. They're voracious writers. Some people talk about it. Some people talk to God about it, or their best friend, or their puppy dog, or each other. Or some people talk about it on podcasts.
I talk to myself and then I blame it on my kids. And I realize my kids are grown. They're not in the house anymore. Shucks.
But it somehow gives it less power once we name it. And once we name it, we can start to think about maybe renaming it. And I like to use the words when I'm feeling really lost in those moments as it's temporary. It's temporary. We all have hard moments. We all have reason to feel anxious at times.
Yes.
And by helping remember that temporary part, I believe there is some power in that pause. And our bodies, because our neurotransmitters are all mumbo-jumboed, are getting messages that we need to do things that aren't real.
Yes.
Our body may make us feel like we're anxious, right?
Yeah, no one would know that you've been through what you've been through. You seem to have had a charmed life. You're fun and silly and whimsical and you're so open. You've worked very hard to get to this place. I know this. I can see the work you're doing because I know you. But you've made choices to make that happen. You've learned that the brain has a signal of danger, and dopamine is also present in fight or flight responses, the freeze, the flight, the fight. I'm always the fight, by the way. Just stand on my right side and you'll be fine. You know,
Right. And so there's the power part, right? So why does all of this matter, right? And it's
Mhm.
not, it's because we all want to live well. We want to live our best lives. And when we're
Living
faced
well.
with a challenge that mucks with our responses, we have to learn new ways to live well. And I think sometimes it can be as simple as just changing what we call it.
Yes. And this is why every victory counts is so important. To
Indeed.
relish and sit in and surround ourselves with the gratitude of the things that are going right. And so I would also add, and this is where I want to put this really fine point here. I want this to be a marker. Don't force positivity. Go for neutral. Go for maybe a little bit of the stoicism.
Mhm.
Maybe just lowering expectations, because expectations will have us miserable.
Indeed, I used to, when I first started going to, it was a form of rock steady boxing. I used to tell myself, you only have to go for 10 minutes.
Wow.
Because when I'd wake up, I'd be nervous about it. I didn't feel great. I had new symptoms. My body was doing new things. The last thing I wanted to do was jump into exercise clothes and go work out. But I learned that if I could get myself there and promise myself that I only had to stay 10 minutes, I changed the narrative to, oh my gosh, I've got to go do a whole hour workout. It's going to take all my morning. I'm going to be sweaty. I'm not going to feel good, blah, blah, blah. To, nope, I just have to get in the car and drive over there and stay 10 minutes. It changed how I felt about it. And over time, I learned, of course, that it had great benefits, but I needed to change how I presented that to myself. And
Yes.
I also started to focus in terms of the body pieces of what I still could do.
And this leads me to the next thing. Showing up for others can also be beneficial to your health. That's not why I suggest you do it. I suggest you do it because of all the things. It's a mutually beneficial thing, and it connects us more than anything. So even though I think I may have nothing to give, like who am I going to help? I can't even walk today. You'd be surprised. Who might need to hear something that you have to offer? Who might benefit? The smallest gesture. Breaking it down into the pieces, like you just mentioned, too, is so important. Not taking the whole bite at once. Saying, I just need to get to the shower. Hey, there's a victory to celebrate. Pause. Next thing. And this is another thing that this long-term goals. Like we want to survive this. It's not a race.
It's not a race. Nobody's keeping time. And I think in our high-powered careers, and many of us had big stressful jobs before Parkinson's, and there's this sense of loss with that we can no longer keep up at that pace, and that somehow that's bad. So we have to change the narrative in our own brain. And that includes, I've heard people tell stories like, well, before I got sick, I had a job and I did these things. And I choose to not use the word sick, because sick denotes needing to lay in bed, put one's feet up. For me, that associates an acute episode with a fever and chills and completely unable to contribute. And when I mean contribute, I mean even contribute to one's own day, like fixing one's own meals, going on a walk, taking out garbage, returning a phone call. We need to tell ourselves stories that feed ourselves. I am still valuable. I can still contribute. Going back, Heather, to can I be of service somewhere? At my lowest points in feeling down and depressed, I will try very hard to pick up the phone and call somebody who I feel I could be of service to, whether that's an elderly family member, whether that's a family member with a new baby. because it gets me out of my own story in my head of,
Yes.
I have so much loss. I am hurting. I am sad. I am apathetic.
And your public persona matches your private life very much. You have so much integrity.
Oh,
Because I've called you and you're like, no, I'm babysitting my niece today, or I'm doing service for someone. You're always helping people. And so is Ken. It's part of your family dynamic. I can tell that your daughter, from the picture you showed me the other day, is also a person who's in service, as an example. Good job, Mom.
oh, thank you. Wow. I can't take credit for those kids, man. They're pretty spectacular. Well, they're adults.
Isn't it crazy? I look up at my kids now and say, go to your room. Oh, yeah, there's no room and you're taller than me.
Right, right. I think the world's a big place, and I think we get to choose where we fit into it. But I think the biggest choice we make is how we want to be ourselves. Do we want to be remembered for having Parkinson's for 20 years? I remember hearing about somebody who said, oh, yeah, I never saw my grandmother in 20 years where she wasn't dying.
Yeah.
I don't want to be known as the mom who was dying for 20 or 30 years of Parkinson's.
But let's go back to love yourself. And I don't mean Justin Bieber.
Right.
You should go and love yourself if you like. I'm not talking about liking the way you look either. I'm talking really enjoying your own company.
Indeed.
That's another way that I get through this and reframe this and flip the script. I like my own company. I like to paint here alone and write. And I also get lonely sometimes. So I just keep reminding myself that my thoughts are not reality. That thoughts come and go. Like we just talked about inviting the monster in or inviting the anxiety and saying, just don't stay too long.
Just don't stay too
Thoughts.
long.
Just stories. Dropping the story helps. Looking at a situation very plainly can help me flip the script. And prayer and meditation, I'm not in charge. I'm really not. I can change very little.
And Heather, the science really backs us on this too. That's what's been fun. I happen to be pretty science driven as a clinician, and reading about this process of how we lay down neural pathways in our brain, right? That our brain is constantly learning, and that if we practice things like changing our narrative, okay, yes, I feel anxious. Please don't stay too long, anxiety. I'm going to think about what I can do today. The more we practice that and flood our brain with those messages, the easier it gets to do it, right? We don't pick up a violin and instantly know how to play.
Don't I know it?
I wish.
I studied it for almost 20 years, and when I quit, nobody was sad.
Our son played the saxophone from 4th grade until he graduated high school. So, and it doesn't come overnight, right? But in that practice, it becomes more automatic. And it's the same way with shifting how we feel about ourselves.
Yeah.
The story we tell ourselves, the story we tell others. And I agree with you every ounce that you need to be authentic in it. No one's asking you to be Pollyanna or to pretend. It's not.
That never works.
It doesn't work.
It's like Photoshop. We have all these kids looking like anime or cartoons now. So Photoshop is way overdone.
Right.
Come on, be real.
Be real. And I think you can be real and still grow. Even if you're in bed and suffering, you can change your narrative.
I mean, in bed alone and suffering. I was going to say, you need a new partner then. That's terrible. So I liked this quote too that someone just reminded me of. Buckminster Fuller said, love is compassionately attuned to, quote, other than self. Or what if there's no separation between what I see as me and the person with a deficit of housing 2 blocks down?
Indeed.
What if we are the same? That could be me, I could be you, you could be, And so to say that changes perceptions, angles, the way we look at things.
And the Dalai Lama and excuse me, the Reverend Desmond Tutu in the Book of Joy talks about this idea of this virtuous circle. And they talk about how when we are doing for others, we are not focused on our own suffering. And perhaps that then frees our next step up, a friend, whoever you're helping, to not focus so much on their suffering. So it has a cumulative, perhaps, effect in this virtuous circle. And, no matter what your belief system is, no matter your religion or creed, or there's always space to do for others. And I think it should be an integral part of who we are as humans. And I think that's my bias a little, Heather. I think it's my default, but I do think it helps me to get out of my own head.
Yes. And not take ourselves quite so seriously.
Indeed.
Because everything is uncertain. Like in Pema Chodron's book, Comfort with Uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, change your attitude, just remain kind of neutral. And then she goes into Tonglen. I get to neutrality.
Say that again, into Tonglen.
Tonglen, it's Tonglen.
Okay.
It's the practice of sitting with the suffering as you perceive it of others. Breathing it in and breathing out goodness and breathing out the good stuff for them. May you be well. May you be loved, the whole thing. It's very difficult with people that are a challenge. It's hard with difficult people, but you can get to the postman or someone you feel neutral about.
It's good to start practicing with neutral, right? If
yes.
Behavior or a new way
or you could start with you could start with a baby.
Christmas dinner.
Oh. And you're with your relatives that have different ideas about politics and religion than you do.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Or that uncle that holds your waist a little too long when he hugs you.
Mm-hmm.
I digress. Heaven and hell is right here on earth, is what I wanted to say.
But it's powerful, right, Heather? Right. So if you start small and you start with things like the checkout gal or the people in line behind you at the market, or, your dog, or, something that is a more neutral tryout, it does get easier with the more challenging people in your life.
I've also been thinking about our carers, our partners, the caregivers, and how we can empower one another through simply communicating.
Yep.
It says, I sleep well focusing on the positives. Doesn't mean we shame ourselves or them when we feel a little not positive. So there's that too. There's so many ways to flip it, though. There's so many ways to change it. I'm a writer, so I like to do character sketches. So I ask, what would this character do? We can view ourselves that way. What's going to happen next? I'm going into a situation like a party that I don't want to go to, or a wedding that you have to attend, or something along those lines. Before you go into the room, zip up your energy. Take a few deep breaths, do some box breathing or whatever it is, say a little prayer, mantra, whatever, and set an intention. Now, does this always work? Absolutely not. Again, it's not up to us.
What, we have not achieved perfection?
Oh,
I'm so bummed.
I know. What happened to that? I had all these ideas of how my life was going to go. This is not what I planned.
Oh, it's so not what I planned.
I want to blame someone else.
Right.
It's got to be someone else's fault.
Right.
And that's where we lose our power. What can I do? What is my responsibility in this situation?
I also think it's really nice to have a community who will call you on your stuff.
Yes.
Who will let you check in and perception check. I feel at the moment really lost in this. I've had a rotten headache. This cervical dystonia stuff is rocking my world literally and figuratively. And man, nothing like having a 2 or 3 week headache.
And for people listening, she's not talking about her cervix. What is cervical dystonia, my dear?
Correct. Cervical dystonia, thank you, Heather, is muscles fighting against each other in my neck, not my
That doesn't sound like fun.
No, it's not. It's uncomfortable and it gets old, but I'm trying to go back to that language. This too shall pass. I will figure this out. It's a new challenge. I don't want to let it define me. I'm trying to show up, even if I'm not 100%, and give myself a little bit of credit for that.
Now, let's talk about this, though. Here's another way we can flip it. This is about letting the days be hard. When we mourn someone, letting that grief come in, instead of saying, I've lost them, we can say they mattered. The world without them is feeling diminished, but there's a part of them still here. We sit with the grief, we carry it with us, and we allow the beauty of that softening. Instead of, I'm devastated, I'm ruined. And believe me, it takes a lot of practice to get there.
Interesting. And that's true with grief, to grieve is to have loved, right? And they go hand in hand. And accepting that pain of loss or grief is somewhat the price we pay for finding love and
for loving.
But it doesn't make it easier, but it does make it universal.
So what would you say to someone that's inexperienced in this mind training, this neural pathway sort of, how can they keep moving through something that they don't really have techniques for?
Heather, that's a great question. And I've been super intimidated by this idea of like, meditation, like clear your mind. I have never cleared my mind.
Because you're not dead. The ego needs a job. The ego's always going to be running around, galloping around.
Right. For me, and my way may not work for anybody else, but I started by just counting my breaths in and my breaths out. And as I started and this was way pre-Parkinson's, it was when I was parenting young kids and had a very busy job. I also sort of had this saying, back to the words matter. I would say, I am one human being. I am doing the best that I can do. And that gave me permission to honor that things were hard and overwhelming, and I didn't feel like I was keeping up. But I think thinking about telling ourselves simple words help. And words that resonate with you. It may be, for some people, they'll say, I'm going to breathe in peace and calm. I'm going to breathe out love to all.
Good luck with that.
I know. Yeah. See, that's kind of that simplistic thing. So for me, I would just count to 10 over and over again as I breathe deeply. And it helped me to kind of focus on my breathing rather than my grocery list, who was in labor, did kids get proper lunches for school today? Who's picking up who from after school activities, But Heather, I want to hear how you do it. How do you clear your mind? And
I don't. I just sit with it. I sit with it. I'm a furious person. I'm filled with rage. I'm furious. Why do I think I have a boxing bag on the other side of my room here? It's right in the middle of my living room. People come in, the first thing they see is a bag that I'm hitting a bag. I'm always angry and agitated. My mind is a circus. There are things galloping around up in here that I can't even identify. They're like unicorns, but they're not. I woke up the other day and someone was pulling my fingernails off in my dream. I was so angry. And I realized I woke up and I had a beautiful friend here. And he was out on the couch sleeping and snoring. I said, snoring is keeping me up. And he said, it was. I said, no, I'm joking. Parkinson's is keeping me up. In other words, it's my own noise. Recognizing that is the very first step. It's like saying, I'm addicted to something, or I'm just in this stinking thinking. That way I take full responsibility. Once I've done that, then I can have all these techniques. I can watch the mind on a screen and go, oh, there you are again. Coming around again. Nothing ever stops until it teaches us what we need to know.
You don't have to wait for the eclipse, right, to stop?
Right. Or like Mercury's in retrograde or having some excuse. The dog ate my homework. How about I'm human? I'm going to keep screwing up.
Doing the best I can do.
With the resources available in the moment. We plan for things like we're going into war. And then everything falls apart. We're like, darn it, I brought that because I needed that for this. And it was supposed to happen. This was supposed to. There's no supposed to. There's no enforceable rule about life. Like Fred Luskin, the one that I referred to before. Unenforceable rules. For example, mother should always be nurturing. We can't enforce that. Some mothers aren't. But we can move forward as adults. And we can be nurturing, even though we might not have been given that.
And I think interesting, Heather, and I think in these times too, we're bombarded with messages that get our attention that can really be disturbing and stressful and scary and out of our control. Yes. And I know that personally, Ken and I have made a conscious decision not to have the news on because I want to control how I allow those messages into my life. And I don't want to be consumed by those messages. And I have power over that because I have a remote control that I can press a button and turn it off, or I can change the channel. And I think that we must do that in the information age. We must learn a balance of what we allow in and have some balance with it.
That is, I know that the viewers can't see me, but I'm like pumping my fists and jumping up and down. I can't even sit still. I'm so excited about this. Curate your life. Have a highly curated life. Pick quality people you can resonate with, who don't dysregulate you and you don't dysregulate them, people who you vibe with. There's a lot to this vibing energy thing. You know, I mean, I mentioned Buckminster Fuller, like energy, and it's all real.
Right.
You know, the love is a superpower.
I love that.
I don't mean to sound like a hopeless romantic because I'm not even talking about that kind of relationship, but love does conquer all.
And
it really does.
Who might challenge you a little bit too. You know, who might push you or call you on your stuff.
Love it. Please do.
Right.
That's a friend that always goes, I totally agree with you. There's always a lot more to the story, which brings me back to the relationships part of this. If I flip the script, people have not abandoned me. The friends who've left because I was quote unquote sick didn't leave because I was sick per se. They may have left because they didn't have enough bandwidth to deal with this too, but that's not personal. It's never personal.
We can't know what others' narratives are. I think an integral part of owning one's own story is letting go of how we fill in or storyline for everybody else in our world. And because we're wrong a lot of the time.
Yes, we're not mind readers. Surprise.
I've been married to the same man who I adore for 34 years, and I get it wrong all the time. He's thinking about something else in his world, and I'm thinking he's frustrated with my, whatever, that I'm taking too long to get ready, or I'm ready too quick, or
that's so classic.
That's my story, right? And how often do we make ourselves sad or unhappy because we've told ourselves a story about somebody else?
Especially people who had to grow up being hypervigilant because there were perceived threats or real threats.
Right.
And that no longer serves us. So now when I enter a room, I don't look for any threats. I do some preemptive strike or try to protect myself. You can have boundaries and still be open.
And Heather, that goes back to what you were saying about enter with intention, to even take a pause, I'll do that sometimes before I go into the grocery store. I know we talk a lot about the grocery store, but I have to kind of prep myself.
It's a big outing for the week.
So, that mind talk of, okay, there's going to be a lot of people, there's going to be a lot going on sound wise, but prepping yourself. And then inevitably it goes smoother if I give myself some pause, or before you go to Christmas dinner, find out who's going to be there first and then prepare yourself.
I don't know, my brothers and my family do it. Everyone in my family is a public school teacher. And boy, are times that changing.
Indeed. Right. Talk about service, right? I give great kudos to school teachers and those in public service. So thank you all for tuning in. We hope we're bringing a little richness to your world and maybe a thing or two to think about. I don't know, Heather, thank you.
I'll leave you with a quote too, if I may.
Yeah.
So with regard to the suffering that we're trying to get away from, or try to change, or try to maybe just change that script about it, or the dynamic, all forms of suffering are like dreaming that your child has died or gone away. Taking confusion as real wears you out. When you run into misfortune, look at it as confusion. This is the practice of the Bodhisattva. And this is not preaching or religious. It's just philosophy from Reflections on Silver River by someone named Ken MacLeod.
Ken MacLeod.
Yeah, just stay with it. Stay here now. Life has its beauties.
Yeah.
Thank
It's
you.
a ride out there. Be careful. And enjoy.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Parkinson's podcast Unfiltered with Heather Kennedy and Kat Hill. For more information about the Davis Phinney Foundation and to learn about educational offerings and community events for people affected by Parkinson's, please visit davisphinneyfoundation.org or dpf.org. This podcast includes information about Parkinson's and insights from our Parkinson's community. It is not intended as a substitute for treatment advice from your own medical providers.